everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we discuss causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is James Azar. He is an accomplished security professional, free agent CISO, and founder of the Cyber Hub podcast. James, welcome.
Hey, Pete, thanks for having me on, man. Congratulations on starting the podcasting journey and joining the brotherhood of podcasters.
Thank you, sir. I'm excited.
Don't worry. Whenever you make a mistake, just know it's very human when you say, stuff wrong. I say it all the time on my podcast. It's okay. It's just the beauty and the authenticity of you being an amazing host.
Awesome. Well, could you give our guests, or I'm sorry, our listeners just a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. So I've been in security for as long as I can remember now, a little over 20 years. My entire career has been based around the idea that, I'm trying to solve problems and kind of align security with everything else I do. From a business perspective, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing a lot of CISO work. Before that, I was doing founder work in the fintech space around fintech security. Now I've been a CISO, most recently a CISO for a startup that raised $90 million, unfortunately failed within 6 weeks of launching. Not from a lack of the good news is it wasn't from a lack of customer interest. We had a long wait list of people that wanted to be part of the company, but unfortunately, like in a lot of startups and in a lot of business, sometimes you just don't get to do everything you want to do, and time and money are a significant factor in everything that goes on. So now I find myself as a free agent, kind of seeing what's out there.
Awesome. Well, to any listeners, I know we're going to have a lot of CISOs and hiring managers and a lot of high-level folks watching this. So definitely hit James up. He's on LinkedIn, and you can find him via the podcast as well. And at the end, too, I'll have you tell the audience how to find you and stuff like that.
Sure. So, thank you.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you being on, James. You've been in hiring positions multiple times throughout your career. How do you view the talent gap, as is, the title of this show? Is it real? Is it imaginary? And how do you think of it?
So I don't know that I see a talent gap. Let me start with that. So when you look at entry-level roles, you and I have a lot of people that we connect with us on LinkedIn that are trying to break into security and can't catch a break to get there. So that to me is, I'm not getting a talent gap. To me, the definition of a gap, right, is when someone's contacting someone overly qualified for an entry-level role. That doesn't exist. And when it does happen, it's probably because someone just overlooked the detail. They're just mass spamming everyone, offering an entry-level role. But I'm not getting contacted by recruiters going, "Hey, we're looking for a security architect. Do you want to be a security architect?" Right? That's just not something that's happening to me. That would be the definition of, we have a security talent gap because we don't have enough entry-level people going into entry-level roles. Where we have a challenge filling roles is, I think, predominantly in that mid-level leadership roles, right? So the manager to director level, I feel like there's a gap there. And the gap exists there because of one of two things. Either we're not building our junior pipeline and developing them to become leaders. So then when we're trying to hire leaders to expand our teams, we're not finding the right people with the right set of experience in order to become leaders. Or there's just a general lack of knowledge on a specific topic. Prime example, ChatGPT AI right now, right? Like, that's all the hype. Well, I'm seeing positions out there being in the market where people are like, I'm looking for a director of ChatGPT with 2 years of experience in AI. And you're like, you guys realize this came out like 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Like, no one's got 2 years of experience messing with the tool. Everyone's learning on the fly. So why don't you say we're looking for someone extremely curious who's been playing around with ChatGPT since it came out and has some leadership experience that can come and be hands-on and build out a team around our desire to utilize ChatGPT.
I think that kind of comes from a lot of companies looking to somehow quantify what they're looking for, so the only thing they can think to put out there is, well, we need somebody who's done it for X, Y, and Z number of years. But for me, that doesn't necessarily speak to ability in doing something. You could have somebody that's, fresh out of high school that's been messing with AI as long as he's been out of high school, and hasn't been that long, but he just, super sharp and can pick it up very quickly. And that person may be more effective at utilizing AI than somebody who's been in IT for 20 years. So how do you measure that, I guess, or how do you make sure that you're not filtering out that person if that's, the type of role that you're looking to hire for?
I can tell you that in the last 2 months, I've either applied for a bunch of roles where you get the automatic email, right, that says you don't qualify, and you're like, are you sure? Like, has any of you looked at this, or is it just we're looking for two things, and if you don't have those two things, we're not going to have that conversation, right? I think this comes down to what I like to call HR bureaucracy. The HR bureaucracy is the justification of why I have a job in HR, right? And setting some sort of standard that could apply if you're in finance or law or legal, where I think you want to have that experience, and you got to come with those certifications and those degrees, because while you can teach yourself to be a lawyer, you've got to be bar certified in order to practice law. And that's very different from cybersecurity and technology in general. I don't need a degree to be in tech or cyber. I don't. The whole idea of a degree to me is asinine. It's what it's doing is it's funding the sort of lack of creativity that comes from going into one of those degree programs where you're really learning the basics that you can learn all on your own. But then it's shutting down any sort of diversified school of thought around solving problems. That was my issue with certifications 2 to 3 years ago. And it's stuff where I was speaking to, the SCA, CSA, sorry, or IC squared, or and others. And, there was some real feedback into the idea of, let's kind of cover the basics. Let's not teach a school of thought. Let's teach the traditional way that we've solved these problems, but let's not make that the only way you can solve a problem, because otherwise we're never going to solve problems if everyone thinks the same way. So the diversity of thought is really critical. And that's the HR bureaucracy. The HR bureaucracy is you've got to have a degree in a cert. If you don't have a degree in a cert for specific roles, especially in leadership, then they're not interested in speaking to you. Right now, I don't have a college degree. I've gone to college, never finished. You know why? Because I started businesses. Been successful with some, sold them. Been less successful with others, failed. And I'll take that too. And I know that currently, I'm telling you out of personal experience in my current search, right? I've had recruiters and HR people tell me, well, they're really big on a bachelor's, and I was like, well, for what? What beats 20 years of starting businesses and selling them and running technology teams from scratch? A 4-year degree from a college? What am I going to learn there that I haven't learned in the last 20 years doing this?
I think a lot of the disconnect is people that aren't in security, they don't realize how different security is from other fields. Like I used to recruit in IT, and this is a good example. Even going from IT to security, it was a huge learning curve for me because I didn't understand how different security was. It was a newer field. People weren't as seasoned. There weren't as many well-defined job titles and roles and things like that. So I had to kind of learn all this stuff on the fly. And, especially HR and recruiters that don't specialize in security, they just don't know how different security is. So I guess the question for me is like, how do hiring managers stay close enough without having to micromanage the HR people to make them effective at filtering people, filtering out the people that aren't fits without filtering out the people that could be fits based on some arbitrary criteria, and how do you get um, your lack of degree requirement approved by HR if that's, corporate policy, that sort of thing.
So Pete, you and I've had the opportunity to professionally work together in my last role. And you worked with one of our internal recruiters at the company at the time, an awesome human being by the name of Madison, Maddie from a lot of HR people I worked with. Our entire HR team at my last firm was unbelievable, right? Because what we did is we went out and we kind of set it to where we're not looking for education mattered for our founder, right? We had a lot of people that were Stanford and Harvard educated, Ivy League school folks. We had a lot of those as well. But then we looked at everywhere else across the org, and I said, well, I get that we want to have that, and we want to have those alma maters because of the index they also come with when you're a Stanford grad and a Harvard grad, right? And the alumni access that you get there. That's predominantly why a lot of companies go for those grads. In our scenario, we Maddie and I kind of went about hiring very differently. We said we're looking for hands-on experience. We're not looking for college degrees or certs. It's nice if they have them, and those were under the nice to have category. If you remember in our job description, not required to have a degree. You're not required to have a cert. But if you've got a passion for security, if you've been doing it and practicing security for the last 2, 3, 4 years, you're someone we want to speak with. And you're someone we're going to give a chance to. And that opened up our pool significantly to a whole lot of talent. And being the fact that we were willing to be hybrid, that we were looking, that we weren't looking to have people be in one geographical location or another, also helped our talent pool. And so that was my work with our HR team as a CISO. And I think that's the responsible of every, CISO, head of information security, director of InfoSec or VP of InfoSec, right? To explain that to HR and say, I get why we need this for finance and legal, and not dismiss it because, those are having a college degree to become a lawyer is critical to becoming a lawyer. You can't become a lawyer any other way. You've got to pass the bar exam. And the only way to prep to a bar exam is to go and study in law school. Because if you want to practice any type of law, you got to do that. You want to be a doctor, you got to go to medical school. I don't think you and I would go see a doctor who didn't go to medical school. So this isn't a dismissal of college degrees. It's the dismissal that saying a college degree is the only way for you to learn how to practice cyber, because it's not the only way. You go to Try Hack Me and you find thousands, tens of thousands of passionate young and old folks in the middle of their lives or starting their lives looking to get into cyber and going about and completing challenges. And they're willing to come with a whole lot more. One of the things that I had a struggle with was those mid-career transitions, because those are the people who I really wanted to hire for my manager and director role, someone who could have potentially been in IT or finance and decided to switch to cyber. But then at the same time, they didn't have that hands-on experience that I needed from a leader, meaning I wasn't sure that person could really effectively manage a team. So as a CISO, that was one of my bigger challenges. Now, going back to your question around, what do you do? One, you speak to HR and you kind of change the criterias. You go, I get that you want to have everyone with a college degree, but can we say instead of required, nice to have? We can leave it on there because I don't want to change the template of the job descriptions the company uses with the requirements that the company has that have been set as a baseline. But instead of required, keep it on there and say it's an advantage. But it doesn't mean that we won't talk to you if you don't have it. Because if you've got the experience, we'll take it. And in security now, you're starting to see that a bit more, where you're seeing in the job experience side of it, you'll see a bachelor degree or equivalent time, doing the general job description. And you're like, okay, that's cool. The question is the algorithm picking that up?
Yeah, I think folks really don't realize how narrow some talent pools can be if they're not on the front lines kind of as a recruiter like I am. Like I've worked on positions where there was literally only a handful of people in the entire US that would fit for that job. So if that's the situation, you pretty much have to widen the candidate pool, because if you don't, you're going to rely on like a 20% success rate which is really unheard of. I think it's all about the numbers when it comes to recruiting and hiring. You have to reach out to, say 100 people to get one person hired. But if your candidate pool is 15 people, you're probably not going to get somebody hired. And that's how these positions go unfilled for 9 months. But if you, for instance, drop the degree requirement as a must have, you could broaden that 15 person candidate pool from 15 to 250, for some disciplines. And a lot of the old school security folks came up through IT and not through degree programs and stuff.
So the question is, do you want to have 250 people apply for a position? Right? Because that creates, I've seen it in my own companies, right? Where you get 20 really good people applying for a position and you don't know how to fill it because your hiring criteria changes based on your excitement over a candidate and the potential of that candidate. And I think that's a challenge as well, right? Like there's no middle of the line. Like, you as a recruiter say, hey, I'd love to have 250 people apply for a position that are, great instead of 20. But then am I going to get confused by 250 or am I going to miss a whole bunch of people because 250 people applied and not 20 and vice versa? I mean, the same kind of goes through as, it's one of the bigger challenges, I think, in terms of hiring. And it's really one of the biggest decisions we make as leaders. And I think that's so underrated in a lot of places, right? Biggest decision you make when I was building a security program were the first employees I hired, bar none, because I was looking for unicorns all the way across, right? I wanted someone, right? I wanted someone who knew how to do two things very good and had the fortitude and curiosity to go and learn how to do four other things good enough. And it was funny because in my last role, I was so hands-on, right? That, we used to laugh. I'd be like, yeah, I'm your CISO and I'm your security architect and one of your security engineers and your IM analyst, one of your SOC, analysts and so forth, because that's what you've got to do. And I think in leadership, right, and like in anything, hiring the right people is going to be either how you succeed or how you fail. And it's not something that you can just outsource to HR. Maddie and I worked when we were hiring, it was twice a day that we'd get on a phone call and look at CVs. Twice a day that we would talk about which candidates she pre-screened and what she thought of them and, what were kind of some of those answers. And then her and I would go through it. And then I would potentially pre-screen someone calling for 5 minutes just to kind of, she'd be like, I really like this person, but I'm not sure about X. Maybe you get on a quick call. And I get on a quick call, not an official interview, but kind of just, hey, I just wanted to get to know you a little bit. I heard you spoke to Maddie before we go through an actual process. And in 5 minutes, it'd be like, all right, definitely I want this person going through a more thorough interview process rather than just dismissing them. There's got to be that partnership. If you don't have that partnership with HR, with your recruiters, then there's no point of you doing that because you're not going to be successful because you're going to hire wrong people because you're relying on someone else to fill it out.
Makes sense. So what do you say to the person that, say they're a CISO that's understaffed and they're already working 70, 80-hour weeks? How would you recommend to them to allocate the time necessary to actually be able to stay as close as you were to HR and to recruiting to make sure that the right people are getting on board?
So this idea that phone calls need to be an hour long is a mundane and old idea. Maddie and I could speak for 3 minutes and in 3 minutes get what most people do in 30. I was working 70, 80 hours a week, 70, 80 hours a week, like many of my peers. And I think this comes to managing your time and then understanding your priorities. If I want to cut down my hours, I got to hire the right people so that I can go from 80 hours a week to 50 or 60, right? But I can't keep doing 80 hours a week, hiring people that I don't train or don't invest enough time in understanding their qualifications, hoping HR gets it right. When HR doesn't, go get mad at HR for not getting it right. And play with someone's life because that's what we are as hiring managers. We are going to someone and we're saying, put your trust in us, not only to be paid and provide for your, your family, your loved ones, or yourself, but also for your career's sake. And then a few weeks later, say you're not a good fit. We're sorry, but we're going to go ahead and shake the ground that just solidified under your feet so you can go out and do a job. And that's so dismissed. So my recommendation would be, this is a priority. If you're working 80 hours a week and you can't find right people because you're understaffed, you've got to invest some time in staffing your team and hiring the right people. And that means that you've got to be in touch with HR. You've got to take some time to review some of those CVs yourself. Take really good ones. Take stuff that really stands out for you, and at least send that to HR and say, these are the kind of talents, these are the kind of people and talent we're looking for. If you see this in someone's CV, make sure you set up a first interview call, right?
And I would highlight the importance of doing all that quickly. I know, when you want to make hiring a priority, like you said. But I think what a lot of folks don't realize is how quick you can be to lose people if you don't get back to them. So if there's somebody that's top of their game, top of their field, if they're highly in demand, like for instance, in the surge of ransomware, when all the DFIR consultants were super in demand, they were getting 4 or 5 offers at once. And if you spend an extra week, you could lose on that person that would otherwise accept an offer for you. I'd love to see some actual data on this, but I'd estimate for every week that goes by where a candidate has not heard from you, I'd expect their interest level drops by at least 50%. It's what's the word? Exponential, basically. The longer the time goes, the less interested they get, and the more quickly they get less interested because they feel like they're not a priority. And so a best practice, I would say, is if you do value your people, value their time before they become employees, and they'll notice because not everybody does. And that goes back to trusting your HR and your recruiters. Make sure that they are getting back to people in a timely manner. Make sure that they are reviewing every applicant that actually applies. I had a good example of this actually today. A director candidate I'd been working with. I worked with him as a candidate in the past, and I prodded one of the salespeople at this organization he had applied to 4 weeks ago. So he applied 4 weeks ago, didn't hear anything, and then I just prodded one of their sales guys, and that prompted them to get him in the interview process, and now they're super excited about him. But they didn't get back to him at all. And he had applied 4 weeks ago. So, just base level, bare minimum, make sure your recruiters are reviewing every application. And that'll pay off for your employer brand long term. People aren't going to get ghosted. They're not going to feel like you're, not valuing their time or their effort in applying. And it's something you don't really think about, but maybe you should. Because if word gets around that, you're ghosting people as an organization, it can quickly make sure that those top performers that you want to hire aren't going to consider you. So yeah.
Well, and they're also not going to not work for you. They're probably not going to want to do business with you. If you ghost an applicant, what are you going to do to customers? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that really resonates with HR, with a lot of HR and hiring men. You can't ghost candidates because at one point, especially if you're interviewing someone, especially if someone's gone through the interview process, you can't ghost them. I can tell you that taking time while I was at the airport, once, because I was at the airport twice a week flying in my last role, that's, sitting at the gate waiting for my flight is when I typically send emails to candidates we didn't hire. Just go into my phone, pull up their CV, people I've interviewed, spent time with, and just send them a 2-line email saying like, hey, I really appreciate you thinking and considering to be part of our team. Just wasn't the right fit right now for us, but wish you best of luck. And if you're in the market again and you see another opening you feel like you'd be a good candidate for, let us know. And I'm a resource to help you in anything you want to do in your career. Good luck. Thanks. Bye. It takes 35 seconds to type that up. 35 seconds, maybe. Sitting at the airport, listening to music, writing these out. On the plane after I sit down, keep doing it. Until the captain says we're about, turn off your phones, put them on airplane mode. And even then, if I'm writing it, I'm still keep writing it until we're ready for takeoff. When I feel the engine spool, I'm like, all right, time to go in airplane mode. I'll go ahead and put it in airplane mode. But it's so critical to not ghost people, because to me, if I ghost someone, why would they want to do business with me or my company? If that's the experience they have from your brand, trying to be a part of it, wanting to contribute to the success of your brand, you take their time, you interview them, and then you ghost them. Why would they want to be part of your company thereafter? Why would they want to be a customer of your company or be associated with your company in any sort of way thereafter? And I don't think anyone's in HR has ever given that any real thought, to the fact that we should be replying to every single person we decide not to hire with just a simple email that says, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. We've decided to go another route.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that brings up another good point. So we talked about applicants. As an external recruiter, I don't spend time fielding applications. I don't even bother with putting up job postings, because I found most of the time I end up getting people that are completely unqualified or completely in a different field. And there's a lot of time wasted sifting through those hundreds of applications. Yet I still, if I do put one up, make sure to get back to every single person, because I do recognize the importance of that. But I think far too few recruiting teams are actually doing the outbound activity that they need to do to find the right person. A lot of times that person isn't going to come just apply to your job. You can put up a job posting and you may get a few decent applicants, but you may not get the most ideal applicant. So I spend my time searching the market for the people that are the best fit and not the ones that are applying to my jobs. And the flip side and benefit of that is I don't have to worry about getting back to hundreds or thousands of people that have applied that aren't fits. I'm just instead focusing my time on the people that I know are more likely to be fits based on their experience.
See, I see recruiters, people like you, as having the insight for the applicants, right? You're kind of getting feedback after every interview. And I think one thing that makes that's a differentiator between a good recruiter and a great recruiter is the feedback. Are you going back to your candidate, giving them honest feedback about the interview process, about how they interviewed for a job, potentially about some of their answers? And are you coaching them to be able to win that next job, even if they lose the one that you just put them out for?
That's a fine line. I've been burned by that before, actually giving candid feedback. I still believe in it, but you have to be cognizant as a recruiter of liability and potential legal implications. I had a situation once where I vouched for a guy. I had him interview. He didn't do so well. I think the situation was he was like cursing in the interview, or he brought up politics or something like that. And so it really left a bad taste in their mouth. And I gave him that feedback and, trying to help the guy out. And he ended up like finding the hiring manager's emails and complaining to them and throwing me under the bus. So I've seen the flip side of that. So I think as a recruiter, a hiring organization, you want to both limit legal liability while at the same time providing as much actionable feedback as you can. And that's a pretty tight rope.
That's a rope you're dancing very elegantly as you do that, right? To me, it's fascinating how people who you're trying to help, right? Hey, I'm here to help you. I just want to tell you where you potentially missed in this job interview that could potentially impact the fact that they loved everything about you, but this one thing, if you keep doing it, is not going to get you a job anywhere. And you're trying to be honest with someone and they take it that way. That to me is just, I don't know, man. That sits sour on me. That sits really sour on me. That's just, you want that feedback. I think we all yearn for feedback after interviews. We all want to know what we did well, what we need to improve on, so that next time we're able to become better at what we're doing. No one's saying change your personality, but tone it down sometimes.
Yeah, I think just pure objectivity is tough for most people because we have all of our biases. And, for instance, in the interview process, we have the like me bias. There's a bunch of different biases that we don't think about, that we're looking for people like us, or we tend to give ourselves more slack than.
Can I disagree with you on that? Because I want people that argue with me in job interviews. I will intentionally throw out the dumbest question on planet Earth that you can't agree with me on that. You can't agree on what I'm saying. Like, you can't agree. It's just not an agreeable topic, right? Like, no one should ever do MFA in security. Like, clearly at that point, I'm asking you to really make an argument and see how you stand up to a really dumb idea someone throws out, because it's critical. Practicing security is like being a pilot or being a doctor. There's two things that go in a cockpit, you know, um, and in an operating room where title no longer matters, because you want to get the best result. The best result is that, right? The early on plane crashes, when the NTSB used to investigate plane crashes, and it always fell on human error. You could tell that the co-captain or the co-pilot was trying to warn the captain of a risk, but the captain wasn't listening. They were pulling rank. And so the NTSB updated their manual to say that there's no rank. There's a pilot and a co-pilot. There's one who's in charge of flying the plane and another one who's assisting in different stages of the flight. Meaning you could have the co-pilot take off and the pilot land the plane, and etc. But if there's a risk, then the other person can really take over and address that risk. The same applies in an operating room for doctors, right? Just because you're the chief surgeon doesn't mean that the other surgeon assisting can't stop you from making a mistake. Well, in security, that same principle applies. CISOs aren't all knowing. No one is all knowing on every discipline. No one's all knowing in all disciplines.
Yeah, I think we have an ego problem in security, though. So that pulling rank thing is a pretty regular thing.
Yeah, I refuse to accept that. I know a lot of people in security that don't have egos. I know a lot of people in security and a lot of CISOs in security who want to have good debate around solving significant challenges that exist for your organization. And what I see is that there's a culture that needs to happen, a cultural shift that needs to happen within security to go, we practice security. Keyword practice. It's a practice. It's never perfect. What we do that works today may not work a year from now, because a new strain of malware is going to come out, a new strain of code is going to come out, a new persistence model is going to come out, and everything we've done for the last year goes out the door. No different than how it happens in medical, no different how it happens in law, and no different how it happens in flight school, right? The technology that flies a Cessna 152 isn't the same that operates a Boeing 737. There's similarities, but they're not the same, right? They're very, very different, and it's a different set of skills, right? You need 40 hours to fly Cessna 152, become a certified pilot, but you need, like, I think 400 hours on a Boeing, or 1,700 hours, sorry, on a passenger plane. You need 1,700 hours on a passenger plane to be able to fly a big passenger plane. 1,700 hours. It's no joke. That's no small feature, right? And so that's 6 months of flying 8 hours a day for anyone trying to do the math. 6 months flying 8 hours a day, and no one flies 8 hours a day, right? Regulation states that you got to have, even if you're doing a transatlantic flight, like, you can only fly for 3 or 4 hours before someone else has got to replace you, because they know that alertness goes down. So we in security expect our junior analyst to sit at a screen for 9 hours a day and miss nothing and be perfect every single time. Because if they're not perfect, there's dire consequences, no different than the pilots. So if we as leaders don't start addressing these issues now and go, I'm probably going to have to change the way my analysts operate. Probably going to have to put them in front of the screen for 3 hours, give them a 1 hour break, right? Where they're not on screen. They're doing something else. They're taking a break. They're resting. They're reading. They're watching a education video about something. And bring them back to complete another 3 hours or 3.5 hours or 4 hours, however you want to do it, right? Dictate what works for your team and their stamina, and continuously rotate them in and out, then you're going to lose people often. And we're not going to be very good at security. And we're going to have a bunch of mistakes. And there's going to be egos in the way. And there's going to be dire consequences for leadership and your organization and your brand. We ought to look at security the way, a doctor in an operating room. If you're doing an emergency surgery that takes 9 hours to do, right? You've got stamina for that surgery. The whole team is built for it. So your team is ready for a day of an incident where you've got to work 4 or 5 days to contain an issue or fix it or get something back up and running. But then on the day-to-day, when there aren't these issues, you've got to give your people room to breathe. You've got to understand burnout. You've got to understand when they're practicing security, what kind of breaks do they need to get in the middle? And that was critical, by the way, when we selected MSSP partners. That was one of the things. That was one of my questions. So how do you manage your SOC team? How often is someone sitting on a chair? How often do they get breaks?
That's awesome. Or how understaffed are you?
I mean, yeah, but
it's probably a pretty hard question to answer, I'd imagine, for the
I don't think anyone would ever be honest about how understaffed they are when they're trying to sell you services. You realize they're understaffed when you're speaking to the same person around 4 different things. Because you realize that one person's doing 4 different things. And if that person got hit by a bus tomorrow, God forbid, right? You're screwed. They're screwed. We're all screwed because that person probably managed 10 different accounts and did 5 different things. And they were paying them dirt cheap, right? And now they've got to have 5 people replace that one person. That's no longer a doable service. And you've come to expect some one level of service, and now you're getting a whole different one. That's the problem with unicorns.
Yeah. And you're more likely to have egos with unicorns as well.
They're more like I'm going to push back on you there, Pete. I don't think you've got an ego problem with a unicorn. I think people are protective of their territory at work and at home, right? Like, it's just your nature to want to protect the area you're responsible for. So if you're responsible for 5 areas and you've been given that responsibility and all of a sudden they're trying to take away one of those areas, is it ego? Or is it the fact that you think you know how to do it best? You've become so routine in doing all these 5 things that seeing one thing getting taken away from you shakes the ground you stand on. And that's so often missed in leadership and in hiring and in kind of growing your teams, right? Are you setting the ground up to the fact that you're bringing someone new in to take over one part of what someone is doing? And are you making sure that the ground under them isn't being lifted? Do they know that they're still on solid ground? Do they understand that they're still a valued team member? Do they understand that the people that you're bringing in is to help them, not replace them?
Yeah, and don't put a meeting on their calendar for 15 minutes on a Friday afternoon. That's the best practice.
I believe in no meeting Fridays. I'm a strong believer in no meeting Fridays. I actually don't think we should have meetings on Monday mornings either. I think you should do meetings from Monday afternoon to Thursday morning, lunchtime. From there on out, you shouldn't have any more meetings. You should let the people work, get the stuff that they need to get done. Work on the projects they need to finish. Give them enough time in between to really study, think through an idea so that they're confident when they go into a meeting that they've had enough time and enough knowledge to come with a solid either solution or recommendation to the team. And we don't do that because we do a Friday morning meeting and then we do a Monday morning meeting. And what's changed between Friday morning and Monday morning outside of the fact that you were off Saturday, Sunday?
Always found that kind of odd. Very common in sales, I think, in recruiting to have those Monday and Friday meetings to kind of recap the week and I guess to talk about the week coming up. But yeah, you're right.
Don't you do that on Friday? Like, hey, we had a slow week this week. Let's pick it up next week. Okay, great. Get right on it on Monday. Well, last week we had a slow week and that's Monday morning's call, right? We need to really pick it up this week. And you're like, didn't we have this conversation on Friday? I feel like I could have used this time to actually get to where you want me to be.
One of the biggest things I couldn't stand was micromanagement back when I used to work for a huge corporate staffing firm. It was all about the metrics and we had to hit our numbers, and it inspired a lot of bad behaviors. Because I believe what you track, what metrics you follow, incentivizes certain types of behaviors, and in that case, it wasn't good. How do you kind of, I guess, walk the tightrope between micromanagement versus staying close enough to your employees versus giving them space to do what they need to do?
I hire smart people to do smart work so I don't have to micromanage the work they do. Not saying I don't have to micromanage, but if I have to micromanage you, then we're on a path that's not a good one.
So how do
My
you course in
I'm
that?
sorry.
How do you adjust course in that scenario if you start to get off the path?
So one, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit ago, right? With being part of the hiring process, making sure you're investing enough time with HR to hire the right people. You only have to micromanage people is if you didn't hire the people you hired to do the job, and then you're unsure of the quality of the work they're doing because you weren't really a part of it. You didn't make that decision. You didn't trust that person. You didn't build rapport. What's the interview process if nothing more than building rapport with the person who could potentially be your coworker and partner in your journey to do the work that you're trying to do? Right. So you bring people in as a leader. You've got to have a pulse over things that are going on in people's lives. You can have very good people all of a sudden lose track because something's going on in their life. Someone got ill. There's personal relationship issues that go on. Their kids are getting bullied at school. There's 500 reasons why someone's performance drops that has nothing to do with the company or the management. And it has everything to do with the outside world that's cruel. The outside world is cruel, and it's cruel on people, and different people handle that very differently. Different people handle challenges in their personal lives very differently than what they handle it in their professional lives, right? A challenge in your professional lives, some people dig deep, some people give up. A challenge in your personal life, the same actions happen and not one is associated with the other. So as a leader, one, you've got to make sure, and you've got to keep a pulse on your employees. And that also becomes part of like internal HR, right? You're having, I used to do one-on-one conversations with my team every week, right? 10, 15 minutes. Hey, how's everything going? Is there anything we need to do better? Do you have all the tools you need to do to your job? What are you struggling with? How are things at home? How are things going? Are you happy? Do you feel challenged? Are you overly worked? Are you underworked? Like, where are you at? It's a 10-minute call. Literally, it's a 10-minute call. Someone will tell you right then and there, you know what, we just switched schools because we moved and my kid's getting bullied. And, my wife and I are you know what? Perfect. Right when I finish that, I pick up a phone to HR and I'm like, so-and-so is having some issues. I know we've got some resources to help. Can you please email them the resources that they need? Can you make sure that gets done ASAP so that they have that? And then I'm going to take it easy on them. I'm going to take some stuff away from them to give them time to focus on that, because as long as that's happening, they're not going to focus on their work. So I'll go and I'll ask someone else to take a bigger load to help the team while a bigger workload, so that that person can have a smaller workload so that they can focus on solving that problem. Because once they solve that problem, they'll be ready to take that workload back on and they'll be 100% focused on it. So this is servant leadership. This is what servant leadership is all about. And this is what understanding kind of the new way we need to work with our team members is all about. In this hybrid workplace where a lot of people are working from home, right? So they're sitting at home. So they're more likely to be sucked into the drama that they weren't getting sucked into when they worked remote, right? When they were in the office. Because in the office, you'd get a phone call from your wife or your kid and it'd be like, so-and-so, would be like, all right, cool. I get it. I'll call you back. Go talk to, so-and-so, go solve it yourself. But when you're at home, you don't have that opportunity to disconnect because they stand right there. They're right by your desk. They're pulling out your shirt. They're right behind you. They're not allowing you to focus. And you're in it because you're hearing the conversations in the house. You're hearing the noise, and you've got to step away from it. So this goes to servant leadership, number one. Number two, when you go down the path where you realize that there's nothing that you can do within the capabilities of the company to help that person, performance continues to deteriorate, there comes a time where you do one of two things. You either have the come to Jesus conversation, right? like, hey, your performance is getting to a point where I can no longer cover for you. The team's being overworked. It's just not very good. Letting you know this isn't looking very promising. We're going to start to really have to seriously evaluate your contributions to the team, and see if you're still a right fit for the role you're filling. And if after that conversation nothing changes, then there's that conversation with HR. There's the job posting that'll go up, obviously, to compliment that person, and that person's already who's been on a bunch of pips and forums will likely be walking out. Unfortunately, we'd have to dismiss that person. At the end of the day, we work with humans and we're understanding, but then that understanding has a capacity. It's not because we're mean. It's not because we're all after capital or money. It's because we're all judged by our performance. And at the end of the day, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if your weakest link is getting everyone else on your team sucked into a vortex, you've got to cut that off, because otherwise your whole team's going down that same vortex. They're being overworked. They're making up for that one person slack. And especially in small teams, it's very quickly felt, and you've got to cut that almost immediately, and move it. And it's not the fun part of being in a leadership position. It's not something you look forward to. It's not something you wake up for in the morning and you go, all right, I'm going to do so-and-so, but it's part of the job. The job has goods and bads, and this is the bad. When something happens to someone and they no longer, can become a team member, and you're close. Everyone's close with people they work with. It's just the nature of it. You spend more time with them sometimes than your own family.
Yep. So how do you, I guess, set expectations? Say you're having that performance improvement discussion. I think it's really important to stress that tangible expectations need to be set. Not just you need to get better, but like, how exactly do you get better? Or if you get better in this area, here's what that would look like. This is the goal we're trying to hit. If you hit this goal we're talking about, then, we don't need to have another one of these conversations, kind of thing. Same thing with setting expectations in the beginning. I think when you're hiring somebody, I hear a lot from people that are looking to move jobs. Well, I really don't know what I need to do to get promoted, or, I feel like my head's on the chopping block, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong. There's so much of that out there, just lack of communication and lack of setting expectations. I like to set expectations in the very beginning in the recruiting process. Like, this is how many interviews you're going to go through. Here's what the hiring manager's like. There's going to be a technical round. There's going to be a personality round. Once you get on board, your onboarding is X, Y, and Z amount of days. And really setting that path, where somebody feels like they have milestones to hit, and they're not just kind of wandering through the desert and not knowing what they're doing. That little bit of guidance goes a long way, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, again, setting proper expectations at hiring is critical. The conversation where how you judge someone's performance is typically by their personal KPIs and KRIs, right? And I judge my employees have a balance of insecurity of key performance indicators and then key risk indicators. Meaning, what are you responsible, and what's the risk for the tool or part of the business you're responsible for? And is that risk becoming to a point where it's unacceptable? And what do we want our risk zones to be at in order for you to be doing well in your role, right? And that's one way. That's one thing I use in that conversation, to set really proper goals. And then the other one is just alertness. And attentiveness. And some of that stuff you can't measure. Some of that stuff is just, hey, in meetings, when we do brainstormings, you used to be a major participant. For the last month, you've been just a listener. It's not like you. So I'd love to see you participate more in those meetings, add value to the conversation, the value that we've become accustomed to.
Not everybody, I think, would pick up on that sort of thing, though. So, if you're somebody who's not naturally emotionally intelligent, like, how would you go about working on that, do you think?
A few different ways. One is um, get rid of distractions when you're going into those meetings, right? One of the things I used to coach um, and really talk to a lot of people about is when short, effective meetings do a whole lot more than long, drawn out meetings. Long, drawn out meetings, people end up worn down. They need time to recover from them. And typically there's very little actionable items that come out of it. I have a policy as a leader, 30-minute meetings, nothing exceeds 30 minutes unless something really needs to exceed 30 minutes, right? So if we're trying to solve a problem, we'll do a 30-minute meeting just on that problem alone, nothing else. Don't get distracted by it. I give everyone 2 minutes to talk, and then we problem solve for the rest of the time. So if there's 5 people in the meeting, everyone gets 2 minutes to talk. There's no titles in those meetings, right? So when you come into that meeting, I'm not James the CISO, and you're not Pete the director. We're James, Pete, Mark, Rachel, and Michael, and we're all trying to solve a problem together. And there's no right or wrong. There's no authority in that meeting at all, at all. And typically, I'm the last person to speak because whoever's leading the problem, whoever's dealing with the challenge, is the person that's presenting it, presenting some of the options. The team then goes through those options together. Everyone kind of speaks for a few minutes, uninterrupted, so that they can present their ideas without being thrown off base. And then, we go into the whiteboarding problem solution session. And I come in towards the very end, or I'll help keep the conversation on key. But I try to stay out of it. I try to let the people really excel. So that's one way where you can go to someone and say, I'm having there's a lot of dead space coming from you where there wasn't before. So maybe get rid of distractions, maybe try to be a bit more active listener, maybe tune something out for a little bit to be part of that. There's no perfect way to measure that type of performance, right? And it's not something that because of that you'd lose your job, right? But it's something that would be, for me, a red flag in terms of someone who would be an active voice and participant in something that all of a sudden isn't. And it could be that they don't understand about the topic. And even then, we're just like, all right, cool. Then you don't need to be in the meeting.
Right. It could be a symptom of something else, excuse me, and not necessarily the main thing that you're worried about.
So if you hear the same 2 voices in every meeting, you realize you have a problem. And I think any leader knows that. If the same 2 people or 3 people are always the people that are talking in every single meeting, you have a cultural issue within your team where some people dominate all the others. And this isn't a jungle, right? This isn't, someone needs to dominate someone else. This is a teamwork. This is a group effort. And practicing security requires a whole different set of opinions and a whole bunch of diversity, school of thought, and diverse knowledge. So when the same people are all coming and it's the same people talking, you're only getting one side of a story and they're shutting everyone else up. So typically we start to cut those teams apart. One of my tactics as a leader is if I see that happening, I've had that happen to me before, I start to split them. I don't invite all of these same people to the same meetings. I start to do micro meetings, shorter meetings with smaller amount of people. And I'll get more ideas. And slowly I start to separate it without really having to have the conversation about separating the 3 that are ganging up on everyone else or the 2 that are ganging up on everyone. You just split them. And by split, they each want to shine because they're alphas trying to dominate everyone else. So by nature, then you put them in a different room where everyone else just realizes they're even and they can no longer feed each other. They've now got to work with the rest. And you tend to minimize the damage they do and eventually have those conversations during progress reviews or monthly one-on-ones where you're going like, hey, I know you and so are very good friends and you guys see a lot alike, but in those meetings, you guys can't be the only 2 voices. You can't dismiss others. You can't say we already thought about it and not let someone finish their sentence. It's just not the way we do these meetings. If you can't respect that, then we'll just not have you in these meetings anymore.
That's awesome. Some great hands-on management tips there for sure. And I think if you do all of these hands-on things, you're going to, bringing it back to dollars and cents and what it looks like, to your overall talent strategy is retention is so huge. They say it costs 6 months of somebody's salary to replace them, but I think it's probably a lot more than that for security people. given the demand for those.
Well, the depth of knowledge. The depth of knowledge is like, that's one thing that people don't understand in security, right? Is if I lose an engineer that was working on 2 projects and I lose that engineer, well, by the time I hire another engineer, let's say a month goes by, because engineers, if you've got a talent pipeline that's constantly developing, right? It should be pretty easy to promote from within if your team's large enough to get someone in there. But even if you're hiring from outside, let's say it takes 6 to 8 weeks to get a new engineer in. It takes another 2 weeks to get them onboarded, kind of understanding what the hell they're doing. It's going to take them another 90 days to understand what they're working on. 6 months. Not only pretty straightforward, it's minimum to the complexity of what they're replacing. Because if they're replacing something extremely complex, it could take 9 months to a year. In fact, they say that a CISO in the first 90 days in a new role is doing nothing but speaking, listening. Like in the first 90 days in the job, you should be doing 80% listening, 20% speaking.
Pareto principle.
You should be listening to everything going on. One, because as a CISO, you need to understand the internal organizational political structure of, who really has a say in what and who can really be an advocate for security. Number 2, you want to see and identify how does the business operate? How does how does security, vulnerability management, and patching on the IT side operate? Well, you can't do that by speaking. You got to listen. So you jump in meetings and you go, I'm a fly on the wall. I'm listening. You're taking notes. You're making note of people. You're then reaching out to people who stood out to you in that meeting, and you're having conversations with them. And you're trying to build bridges, because that's what you're doing in the first 90 days. You're building bridges. Right? What did you love about the previous security chief here, or the person who was in charge of security, or if it's your first security role? Like, what would you love to see security be a better partner of for you? How can security help you do your job better? What are some of the challenges you're encountering? Tell me about your career progress. Where do you see yourself? How long have you been with the company for? Are you having those conversations even with, not just with the C-suite, but the directors and the managers and the people who are going to be partners to your security program across an organization? So for 90 days, you should shut the hell up, listen more than you speak.
Yeah,
take that all in.
Superpower, I'd say, for sure. That's something people don't utilize as much as they should, I think.
But there's a reason we have one mouth and 2 ears.
Yeah. Well, who was that quote from?
I can't remember at this point, but someone listening will know attribution and put it in the comments at some point.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. We're coming up on an hour here. So appreciate you being on, James. Great talking to you. I think we could talk for another 3 hours, but this is our time. And, you mentioned you are a free agent right now. So how should people reach out to you if they want to either listen to the podcast or hiring?
So LinkedIn, James J. Azar, obviously. The J's there for a reason. And if you spam me, you'll figure out why. My podcast is cyberhubpodcast.com. That's the website. And we've got 4 different podcasts there, obviously. Breaking into Cybersecurity, that's hosted by Christophe Foulon, and Renee. The Cyber Hub podcast that I do daily at 9 a.m. Eastern. That's live on every single social media platform. And then the CISO Talk podcast, that's season and weekly and so forth. And so people can see that there. And obviously the website's the easiest way, or LinkedIn, get in touch with me. Pete, so happy you've joined the podcasting family, man. I can't tell you how happy I am to see you finally launch this and drop your wealth of knowledge across the airwaves.
Yeah, appreciate it. We'll be doing 1 a week. So keep an eye out for more episodes. We'll publish them on LinkedIn and all the platforms. Well, thanks, James. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Pete.